Okay.
Okay, so Suzanne, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and going to do a session here on conflict management. Take it away.
Alrighty. Thanks, Karen. Like Karen said, my name is Suzanne, and been a Kappa Phi for a long time. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how can we always be sisters in Christ? Because, we're going to have conflicts in our chapters, in and amongst sisters, in and amongst officers, and we want everybody to be able to get along within our chapters, so that we can do some good work together. So we're going to start off a little bit about what is conflict, and it's a disagreement, people who have opposing opinions or views. And I guess the best example that I have currently from yesterday is our election, where we have lots of people who disagreed with one another about who should vote for whom. Um, but in terms of your chapter, I listed a couple examples here, to give you some ideas. Sometimes there isn't a right or a wrong answer. It's just that, somebody thinks A and the other person thinks B, and neither one is right and neither one is wrong. It's just a difference of opinion. And so this one, the first one says, your chapter's looking at which charity should get the monies that were donated for your upcoming fundraiser, and everyone seems to have an opinion and everybody thinks their charity is best and the chapter should support that one. And so how do you reach a consensus on that? And the next example is your pledge coordinator and her assistant each have an idea for what the next pledge activity should be, and neither one is willing to compromise. And how are we going to resolve this? So we can see some things in and amongst the chapter where there just isn't necessarily a right answer. So I'm going to take a step backwards and talk a little bit about what does the Bible say about conflict. So from Proverbs 17, it says, starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. So drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. And so if you've ever seen a dam breached, all of the water that was being held back by the dam suddenly goes through the dam and the whole thing bursts wide open. And now you don't have all the benefits that the dam was providing. So the next Bible verse is again from Proverbs. It is to a man's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. And so just another comment about it's good to get along. The next one is from 2 Timothy, and the Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. And the last one is from James 4. It says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? And so the Bible has some definite opinions on the fact that we shouldn't be quarreling, we should be trying to get along, we should be trying to reach consensus, but in and amongst ourselves and our chapters. So I guess the opposite of being a quarreler is being a peacemaker. And so a little bit about peacemakers in the Bible. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God, from Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. And from Romans, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Again, calling for that peaceful resolution to whatever is going on. From 2 Corinthians, aim for perfection, listen to my appeal, be of one mind, live in peace. And the last one from Hebrews 12, make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. So God wants us to get along. And how are we going to get that done? So what are we going to do when we don't agree? Because everyone has an opinion, and our opinions are not necessarily right or wrong because it's what we think or what we believe. And so how are we going to resolve conflicts that arise in our chapters or between our sisters? So we need to look at how each of us personally deals with conflict. And so I'd like you to take the following quiz to see your personal style. Use the following scale to record your reactions to the following statements. 1 is seldom, 2 is sometimes, and 3 is most of the time. And so here are the different statements here. And if you're listening to the recording, you'll want to stop here and actually take the quiz. If you're on here live, I'm going to have you go back to do some of this. But it talks a little bit about here about how you think about conflict. And like the first one, I can be swayed to someone else's point of view. Or I shut down on people who I disagree with. Or I'm going to address it diplomatically and not attack the individual. And do you think that others try and bully their way with you or with other people? And so it talks a lot about different things. People, what happens to your emotional control when you get upset or you don't know how to, you're in a conflict with somebody. You always raise your voice, kind of a one-upsman, I want you to hear me more. People who tend to belittle other people when making their point, to say, oh my gosh, that's so stupid. Well, we try not to do that because it may not be that stupid, it's just not what you believe. And then, you know, do you think that conflict in meetings is necessary? Are you going to try and compromise with people? You know, those types of things. So go through this and take the quiz, and then you're going to want to add up your points. So there's a, it says here you add the total score from the following questions, 1, 2, 4, etc. And then you're going to subtract that sum from the scores in questions 3, 5, 7, and 11. And you'll get a total. And what does your score mean? So if you have a really low score, you could be labeled as a pushover. And difficult people might just walk all over you. And so you would benefit from learning to stand up for your ideas and opinions. However, it needs to be done in a diplomatic and tactful way. 5 through 10, you're assertive when dealing with people, and you need to continue being open to listening to different points of view and express your ideas appropriately. And if you have a really high score, 11 or higher, you may be combative so that people might avoid interacting with you. You will benefit from learning to listen and express your opinions more effectively. So you can use this little worksheet on here to create your own action plan. So take a look at whatever, pick a conflict that you have going on in your chapter right now, or a recent conflict, and list the specifics of that conflict. Who's involved? Is it just between two people? Is it between you and your roommate? Or is it between your president and vice president, or whatever it happens to be? And then, what kind of action plan can you put together that looks at how are we going to resolve this conflict? What can we do maybe to compromise a little bit? And then, what kind of results do you expect? Well, if it's, you know, one of the earlier examples, you expect to be able to come up with an activity for your pledges that everyone can agree on, those types of things. And then, do you need an accountability partner, somebody who's going to hold you accountable for making sure that this conflict gets resolved in a peaceful manner? So, things that we want to do to reduce conflict. So, we want to process our conflicts and we want to ask ourselves, how much control do I have over this? So, I have two roommates and the two of them are bickering back and forth, and maybe I don't want to get involved. Um, and maybe it doesn't involve me at all. Or, well, I'm the person who's got the conflict with my friend Lucy, and I've got all the control in the world over it. So we need to look at the root cause of the problem. I really want my own way, or whatever that happens to be. And you want to talk to the owner of the process if it's not you. You want to be able to describe the current problem and get an agreement, and suggest a workable solution and an action plan, which may involve some compromise. And then you need to be able to follow through on that and give recognition where it's due. So, if it's an interpersonal conflict, you want to make sure that your personal biases and prejudices don't affect the relationship. So you don't want to, say, oh my gosh, it's so and so, and she's always, this way or that way, and that's why you don't want to deal with the situation. You want to be able to work through some of that in your own heart and in your own mind, so that you can come maybe with more of a fresh attitude or a fresh mindset on what's going on here. And then they suggest that you can write down 3 things that you could change in order to reduce the conflict in the relationship. And then you need to commit to following through on that for at least 3 months. You can ask the other person involved about, how you could diffuse the existing conflict and encourage feedback. Now, that might seem brutally honest, but if you really want to get to the bottom of something, you're going to want some honest feedback on how things are going. And you might hear things like, well, I didn't like, how you handled this, or I was hurt when, those types of things. And put yourself in their position. Unless you've walked a mile in somebody else's shoes, it's really difficult to know where they're coming from. And so by trying to put yourself in their position, sometimes you can get an idea of, oh, wow, they see it a little bit differently than I do. And if I were in their shoes, yeah, I wouldn't want that either. And then the last thing you can do is you can make a list of the 5 strengths that you see in the other person and 5 ways that improving the relationship would benefit you. And so it's more of a positive spin on, okay, how can I get this relationship to improve? How can I get along with this sister better? How can I show them that I'm serious about, getting along with other people and resolving the conflict that you have? So, we want to work on teamwork in our chapters, because when we work together as a team, we get a lot more done. And conflict can cause dysfunction, because then everybody is stopped. Nobody's making a decision. Nobody is willing to move forward. We don't want anything in our chapters to spiral out of control, so that that nothing gets done. We want to be able to spend our time in study, in worship, in fellowshipping with one another, instead of in conflict. And then once you can put some of these things to use, and you can see maybe from other people's points of view, you can start to work a little bit more effectively with everyone in your chapter. Oops, I need to go back. I apologize. Uh-oh. patient with me here for a second.
No problem. We're not going anywhere.
Okay, good. Okay, here we go. So here are steps to win-win conflict resolution where both parties feel like they came out the winner and nobody feels like I had to give in 110% totally to what the other person wanted. And I feel awful about that because, I don't like the way things are going and we don't want that. And so we're going to clearly see what is the issue. We're going to define it and we're going to agree what's the problem here. And this does not involve any criticisms or complaints or anything like that. It is factual. What's the problem? We need to figure out a solution for blank, whatever that happens to be. And be very specific about that, what that happens to be. It's not, not anything very personal. It has to be, this is the specific issue. We need to pick an activity for everybody to do. We need to pick a charity. And while they're all worthy, we can't give our money to 10 charities. We need to pick one. We need to have a positive attitude, because if we have that attitude of, okay, we're going to fix this, we're going to make it better, then, everybody seems to say, okay, alrighty, we're going to make it better. We're going to agree on something, and we're going to be able to move forward. We like to walk in the other person's shoe, like I said before, so that you can see where they're coming from, and maybe you can understand their points a little bit better. We want to be able to find, what do we have in common? Well, we all think that we need to donate money to a charity. There we go. There's our common point. We want to actively do fundraising for a charity. We want it to be something that, benefits XYZ, that sort of thing. And think about the common goals that you have together. And then this is the really hard part for a lot of women, including myself, is dealing with facts and not emotions. No shrieking, no crying, okay, this is the fact, this is the situation, and the other thing is that, try not to pass judgment on other people's ideas and opinions, because, like I said before, they may not necessarily be wrong, they're just different from what you think. So, and then we need to look at providing suggestions and alternatives. Are there workable solutions out there? We've done a couple of those things at council where we've had, multiple charities that have wanted, we've wanted to give money to, and while we haven't been able to do 10, we've been able to narrow it down to 2 or 3, and then we've said, okay, we're going to split the money between 2 charities because they're both very worthy causes, and maybe you have, a sister in your chapter who's, have something invested in that charity, and so you decide to go with that. And so if there are other people involved, you can ask them for their opinions and alternatives if you're really stuck. We want to be able to listen first and then talk. So you want to hear out the other person, and then be able to talk and respond to them after that. We want to be interested in the other person's point of view, and we want to use I and we instead of you. So you don't want to ever say, oh, you don't think that we should go to the restaurant in town or that sort of thing. You want to use things that you think, well, I think that there aren't as many choices at that restaurant as maybe at other places. And that's why I don't think that that's a good option. And that way people know it's just your opinion and it's not anything that you've put off on top of somebody else. We want to try and keep an open mind and not interrupt when other people are talking. We don't want to ramble and kind of go on, or show poor listening skills where it's where the other person feels like you're going la la la, I can't hear you, with your fingers stuck in your ears. And then you want to try and explore possible solutions together so that it becomes more of a team effort to say, okay, we're going to scrap what we both want to do, and we're going to try and come up with a workable solution, something that we think that, you know, everybody will enjoy. Or in the first example of, you know, the pledge coordinators, maybe you do involve the pledges and get their opinions on, well, what do you think we should do? And then you can go from their perspective a little bit, and the two of you can get together and say, well, they've come up with some great suggestions, and now we can come up with a definitive plan together, and it might not be what either one of us chose. And then we really want to end it on a positive note, so that nobody goes away feeling like it left a bad taste in their mouth. And that's part of that win-win thing, where everybody walks away and says, wow, that was good. And maybe I didn't get exactly what I wanted, but I really feel good about the decision that we made. So there are some things that you can do to help with managing conflict in your chapter. And they're listed in here as conflict resolution games. And it's more of a like team building exercises, because if you've done this type of game and you've had to work as a team together, it'll be a lot easier to solve conflicts or to even avoid conflicts, because you'll already have some of those skills of, we're going to talk it all out first instead of pitting A versus B to try and get their own way. Oh, I'm getting good at this, Karen. Okay, I'll go back here. Okay, so the first one is called I'm Listening, and you are going to find a partner and spread out in the room, and each pair is going to get 2 handouts face down, and you're going to play it in 2 rounds. There's scenario 1 and scenario 2. Each person has a specific role, and each will have the chance to be the talker, and each will have the chance to be the listener. Everybody turns over their handouts at the same time. You give them about a minute to read the directions, and after a minute, now start talking. They have a couple minutes to complete scenario 1, and then they move on to scenario 2. And then they have discussion questions, and everybody comes up with appropriate listening strategies, and then you report back to the entire team. So you ask things like, when you were the talker, what feedback did you receive from your listener? And how did you feel about that feedback? And did it influence what you said? And what kinds of things are appropriate for listening and feedback strategies? So there's listing 2 scenarios. There's the scenarios here. So here's the first one, talker 1. You're having a difficult day at school. You've just hung up after talking with your roommate who's upset at you for leaving the bathroom a mess. Your computer won't connect to the network, and your best friend just snapped at you. It's been one of those days when everything seems to go wrong. You turn to another friend for a little empathy. You just want to talk it out for a few minutes. So your role is to tell your friend about your difficult day and how you feel about it. The first listener is the friend comes to you with friend and roommate problems, and after listening for a few seconds, you realize that his or her problems are minor, compared to yours. You interrupt to negate what your friend is feeling and to offer your solution and advice. And your role is to say things like, oh, it's no big deal. You will not believe what happened to me. Or, nothing. Just don't worry about it. Or, here's what you need to do. This is how you can fix that. And you interrupt that person constantly to give your reactions and your advice. So then you trade places. The listener becomes the talker and vice versa. And then there's scenario 2 here. It lists about the friend being preoccupied and busy, lots of things going on, you're multitasking, you're checking your email, texting, looking stuff up on your computer, organizing your project. You don't even have time to look at the person because, you know, if you do, she's just going to keep right on talking and going and going and going, and you've got tons of things to do. So you're supposed to use nonverbal feedback to say that I don't have time to listen to you. And everything that you do indicates that you're very busy and that your tasks are far more important than taking time to listen to your friend. Now the other talker, great news! You just passed your big exam and you get to go home this weekend. You're so excited when you get to class that you approach the first friendly face you see to tell him or her about your good news. And your role is to tell your friend how excited you are to go on and on about this weekend, and use voice inflection and nonverbal communication to convey your excitement about all of the things that are going to go on this weekend and how this is going to go so well for you. And so it gives you an idea with the previous scenarios about how you know, you can see some conflicts arising there when people aren't, you know, using good communication skills to express themselves, and when people are ignoring other people and those types of things, and you really want people to pay attention to you when you're talking, and so you want to be polite and be able to do the same thing for them. And so it does give you some ideas of, you know, things that can happen, and then in your groups, some good discussion to go on with that so that everybody can start to see other people's points of view. So the next game is called Hot Buttons, and we're going to tell the participants that it's time to release some stress. Now, who doesn't have that when they go to school? And so for the next 5 minutes, they're going to get a chance to tell other members of their team how to push their emotional hot buttons. Ask them to write down as many specific things. For example, how to push my buttons. Rude tone. Oh my gosh, shut up. Bad grammar. You're being pushy. Oh, I'm whining about everything. I know everything. You don't have to tell me. What you should do is, etc., etc. So then there's some discussion questions. Now that you're aware of some of your emotional hot buttons, what can you do about it? And how can we recognize that? And how can we control our hot buttons when interacting with others? And what do we do if we push somebody else's hot buttons? And how is this activity going to help us deal with conflict more effectively? Okay, next game, in or out. You want to gather a bunch of objects that can be easily categorized into groups, like you got 5 playing cards, 5 balls, 5 paper clips, that sort of thing. You'll also need 2 items that cannot be categorized, like a pen and a staple remover. And you're going to place the same number of items as there are members of your team in a bag. So, and as they come back, as your team comes back from a break, you have them pick up an object out of the bag, and once everyone has something, you group together according to items. And the 2 team members who have odd items will either stand uncomfortably or decide to team up. And you go through the motions of trying to help them find their teams. It can be a little uncomfortable, but if the other teams offer to include them, hold off just a bit to make sure that they don't belong somewhere else. So, you want it to be noticeable that not everybody has a team, but you don't want it to go on for too long. And it's also interesting to notice the lengths that some teams will go through to include them to be in their team. And then when after that, you want to thank the two members and have them actually join a team. And you're going to pass out some handouts. You're going to have them complete parts 1 and 2, and then you're going to form some small groups to discuss the questions in part 3. So the discussion questions talks a little bit about what did you notice when people were trying to fit in, and what effect did it have on your team? And for the people who didn't have like objects, what did it feel like, when you didn't belong, and what was your experience with that? And so, and how, as a team member, can you create the feeling of inclusion? And what can the team leader do to promote inclusion within the team? Okay, so I listed the parts 1 and parts 2, which is to identify a time when you felt included in a group, and with some questions, and to identify a time when you felt excluded from a group. And then that's the small, and then as a group together, the whole group, the team debriefing questions. What can the team do to help feelings of inclusion, and what can they do to promote inclusion within the team? So we want to not let conflicts become sources of stress, long drawn-out ordeals, long-term frictions, or worse, ruptured friendships, and people who just don't, oh my gosh, I don't want to be seen with so-and-so, or, well, she left our chapter because she couldn't get along with. I mean, I think that that's probably one of the worst possible outcomes, in my opinion. Instead, we need to work together to solve our problems openly and honestly, and be positive about it, because when everybody is positive, then everybody walks away with a feeling of accomplishment and a feeling of, wow, we may not always get along, but we're still sisters in Christ. Anybody have any questions?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment that I think you've done a fabulous job pulling this together. I especially like how you tied the Bible to it, as well as made sure that there was also some interaction activities that they can do together as a chapter. So I think this will be very beneficial.
Well, I hope so, because we all know that when our chapters, work well together and our sisters get along, that we do great things for God.
Amen.
Amen.